Hello everybody, welcome to the history of Pac-Man. One of the longest lasting games, one of the original arcade juggernauts that have survived to this very day. An icon of gaming. When people think of old games that have survived the test of time, Pac-Man should definitely be a little high up on that list. It has been ported to everything in its mother. From the arcade, Atari 2600, Atari 5200, the Atari 8-bit, Apple II, VIC-20, Commodore 64, and television, NES, MSX, Super Nintendo Entertainment System, Sega Genesis, Philips CDI. Ugh. Okay, anyway. Game Boy, Game Gear, Nintendo 64, PlayStation, Neo Geo Pocket Color, Game Boy Color, ZZ Spectrum, mobile, all mobile devices, Dreamcast, Xbox, GameCube, Game Boy Advance, PlayStation 2, the Nintendo Wii, Nintendo DS, Xbox 360, Xbox Live, iPod Classic, Virtual Console, Windows Phone 7, PlayStation 3, PlayStation Portable, Wii U, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Nintendo 3DS, Microsoft Windows, Linux, and Mac OS, or Mac OS, excuse me. Ugh. Known as the Macintosh operating software, by the way. And all of this done from a span of 1980 to 2016. And it isn't just one game being ported a million different times. There have been several variations of the game, several sequels. Miss Pac-Man, which is just Pac-Man with a bow on it. Pac-Man Jr. The list goes on. I could talk about this all day long. On the development for the Atari variation of Pac-Man, one of the coders had this weird little habit that he did. Because see, back in those days, finding someone that can code was extremely difficult, and so they can get away with doing whatever they want. This particular individual decided to take full advantage of it. He would then spider crawl, which, by the way, if you're not familiar, when you spider crawl down a hallway, that is where you have one leg and one hand on one side of the wall and one leg and one hand on the other side of the wall, and kind of walk around the hallways to the point where your feet do not touch the floor. Yeah, he did that in a professional office building. He even got so good on it that he was able to actually corral around corners and to go into actual office rooms like that. Why wasn't he fired? Well, again, he was a coder. They were hard to come by, or at least back in those days. Now they teach this type of coding to kids in kindergarten. The original creator of the game, his name is Toru. You know what? I can't pronounce the name properly, so I'm going to spell it. Toruiwtani. Again, profuse apologies for mispronouncing the word. That's why I decided to spell it rather than to try to say it. And what I wanted to speak about was, did he know what he had on his hands when he developed Pac-Man? Did he know that 30 years later it would still be a very successful game? That this franchise just would not die? I mean, it's had its fair share of really bad games, but it's always come back to its original form. Maybe with a different coat of paint, maybe with a little bit more ghost, maybe a little, just little tweaks here and there. But it's something that has always been embraced by the gaming community. It's also considered a benchmark of your skill. Now, when it comes to skill, many people would make reference to a certain person that was at one time considered to be the world's greatest video game player. they recently found out that it is very, very extremely possible that he cheated to get those original arcade scores. Again, I don't want to say his particular name, but we all know who we're talking about. He also did recently had a Twitch stream where he achieved 1 million points on Donkey Kong in order to try to prove his mettle, to try to prove his way back into the record books. But the problem with that is that those type of game, streaming a game, it can be, how do I put this? It can be different. You can alter it. You can alter the game's code. There's a lot of different ways you can cheat with that, so it can't really be considered verified until he was to go to the place, dust off the old arcade cabinets, get his gaming skill back, and achieve his greatness that he once had, and to do it legitimately in front of them, in front of the ones that naysayed him. But until he does that, he will be still considered a cheater. And another thing about that I find kind of quirky is that in Pac-Man Championship Edition DX Plus, or actually Championship Edition DX, there was a worldwide tournament held for this game. This particular individual lost in the second round. And he didn't lose to the person that would eventually win it either. So he got a bare minimum of maybe 4th or 5th place even. And granted, the controls were identical. It's just the game features were a little bit different. If you were a traditional Pac-Man player, you may have had some trouble. But this gave further concrete proof that perhaps he did not hit those scores legitimately. That he may have altered the video files. As a matter of fact, he didn't even win the first Pac-Man World Championship. He didn't even win that. No, that was won by a gentleman by the name of Carlos. He won the first Pac-Man World Championship in New York City in 2007. Kind of makes you think, doesn't it? Kind of makes you think of whether or not this William individual is as legitimate as he thinks he is. Or maybe it makes you think that over the years, maybe his skill has declined a little bit. Maybe he's not as good as he used to be. Or maybe other people, like myself, are thinking, perhaps he was just having an off day. You ever had one of those? You go up to a gaming tournament and you just don't feel like you're going to win. And that cloud hangs on you and it makes it difficult to overcome it. And 99% of the time, you don't. But we're getting a little off track here. Let's try to focus right back on Pac-Man. Especially with the 2016 release of Pac-Man Championship Edition 2. This game is a direct sequel to the original Pac-Man Championship Edition DX Plus. Convoluted title, that is. And what I really like about this particular game is that it's unlocked, that other features, other levels are unlocked via playing it. They're unlocked by actually playing the game rather than buying the DLC package. So I'd say that's a pretty decent return for the Pac-Man series. Now there's one Pac-Man game that was originally released on the iOS and Android systems that may have confused a lot of young players, called Pac-Man 256. Pac-Man 256 is actually just a huge nod to its original glitch that happened in the game. And see, in the original variation of the game on the arcade system, if you got to level 256, half the screen would glitch out. It would become a jangled mess, an unplayable mess. This glitch was never really fixed on the arcade edition, so if you find yourself an old Pac-Man arcade in its original form, and if you can get all the way to 256, which I can tell you right now is very, very difficult. Again, arcade games back in those days had the nickel and dime, taking your quarters mentality. That's how they made money. They didn't want you to exceed past a certain area. So what they did is they made the games insanely difficult. That's why you'll see a lot of the older gamers that have cut their teeth on the old arcade games, such as Mortal Kombat 2, Mortal Kombat 3, Killer Instinct. How they talk about how a lot of the fighting game bosses are so easily beaten these days. I mean, every big fan of fighting games can tell you right now, Shao Kahn 2 from Mortal Kombat 2 and Mortal Kombat 3 and Idol from Killer Instinct were some of the cheapest video game bosses in history. They were absolutely just cheap. Let alone the original Mortal Kombats. Well, Goro, I wouldn't call him that cheap. And Mortal Kombat 3 did have Motaro in it, who was also cheap. But anyway, that is something that does not affect modern day gamers. It doesn't affect a lot of the people in modern day. In modern day games, they think games like Dark Souls is hard. You want hard? You try getting 1 quarter. Just one. You don't have any other continues. You have no extra lives. You try going there, putting 1 quarter in that arcade, and having to go to Pac-Man level 256. You get 3 lives. Well, you get an extra life for every 10,000 points you get, but with every level, the ghosts get faster, the ghosts get smarter, and the ghosts play to their characteristics more so, making your game a lot more difficult to go as you progress. Now, how to figure out the ghost personalities is relatively easy. Just look at their names. Look at their nicknames that they have. You had Shadow. What Shadow would do? He would follow you. He would be a shadow. You had Pokey. He would poke in and out of corners. He would always go boop, 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 boop. Just a little poking, but it's just enough to throw you off your game a little. Just enough to make you think, is he going to go all the way through? No, yeah. It made you think he was going to go all the way through. When he didn't, that caused you to have to immediately backtrack what you're doing. You also had Bashful, who would, he wouldn't actively try to run away from you, but he would definitely try to make himself scarce around you. This also made it relatively difficult for you to be able to get one of the sweetest things you can get. And again, the arcade kids know there was something very special when you got that power pellet and all 4 ghosts were right behind you. That was a sweet moment. It didn't do much. It didn't give you an immediate extra life or anything, but it sure was satisfying to do it. And that's what I'm talking about. That is one aspect that I don't see in a lot of modern games anymore. I don't see that simplistic, satisfactory moments. Unless it's conquering a certain easier to beat level or beating something in a... I mean, that's how speedruns have become so popular. Is because it's a challenge. I would love to have a lot of new games come out with challenges. And of course, the classic argument is, well, they want to tell a story. Well, that would be good if the story was good. You know, a la Telltale Games' Walking Dead, or Don't Nod Entertainment's forget the title. Life is Strange. There we go. Those tell excellent stories. Now, this may be an unpopular opinion, but I'm going to say it anyway. Nathan Drake's story I didn't like it that much. I didn't like the story of it that much. Granted, the gameplay was halfway decent, but I didn't really care for it too much. And with the future incoming releases of Pac-Man, will it be able in 2020 to come out with a new variation that isn't a sequel, something completely brand new and fresh, but yet still bring back that nostalgic factor? No, I honestly don't see that happening. What I see happening though is Pac-Man coming out with a new iteration, but the same basic levels, the same basic gameplay, because why fix what isn't broken? 30 years and people are still playing the arcades. You can go to, well, if you can find one, you can find an arcade place, say, well, anywhere. I can't name the particular locations, but you'll see that Pac-Man cabinet. I can guarantee you will see at least one, maybe one, if not more, gamers lined up with their quarters on the glass to represent that they're next, waiting for their next turn to play Pac-Man. My name is Benjamin Belmont. I want to thank you as I delved into not just the history of Pac-Man, but my personal feelings towards this classic arcade game turned into a decent console game with some missteps, some great leaps, back and forth. Overall, this franchise, if you've never checked it out before, what's wrong with you? There's no excuse. Go. Just go get it. As a matter of fact, you don't have to pay anything if you want to play Pac-Man. No. Just go to Google search and type in Pac-Man. You'll be able to play it there. That's how much of an impact this game has had. Now, before I go, I want to say thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Pac-Man TV series, but due to copyright issues, I cannot. It wasn't that good of a show, in my opinion. It doesn't bring any nostalgic factor for me. But anywho, anyway, I want to thank you, the listener, you, the viewer, for one, staying as long as you can. Staying as long as you have already. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to see more of this content, if you want to hear more about the history of gaming and my personal feelings about it, as well as several other bits and pieces that I've got working up pipeline, I want you to click that subscribe button. It is desperately needed, as it is with every YouTube channel nowadays. But there's also one other thing. See that little bell icon right there? Click on that as well. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful time. Bye-bye.